Welcome everybody, my name is Brendan Snyder. Thank you for joining me. Unfortunately, we've lost another legend in the music world. Founding member and bassist Pete Way of UFO and Waysted has passed away at the age of 69 on August 14th of 2020. In 1968, Pete Way formed UFO along with his friends Phil Mogg on vocals, Andy Parker on drums, and Mick Bolton on guitar. Beginning in 1970, the band released 2 albums with this lineup, starting with 1970's UFO number 1 and then 1971's UFO number 2. These early albums had more in common with space rock than straight-ahead rock. And when Mick Bolton left in 1972, it provided an opportunity for them to find a guitarist that played in a more standard rock sound. After playing with Larry Wallace, who would go on to play with the Pink Fairies and Motorhead, and then Bernie Marsden, who would go on to play with Whitesnake, they settled on an 18-year-old guitarist who played with the Scorpions on their debut album Lonesome Crow, Michael Schenker. In 1974, they released the album Phenomenon, which would focus them on their more harder edge sound, and it featured the classics Doctor Doctor and Rock Bottom, 2 of the biggest hits they would have throughout their career. By the start of the tour, Paul Chapman joined the group on second guitar, but would leave a short time later. He would, of course, again rejoin in 1978 to replace Michael Schenker. And unfortunately, Paul passed away just 2 months ago on June 9th, 2020 at the age of 66, and there is a separate tribute for him on my channel if you're interested. By 1977 and the album Lights Out, the band added Paul Raymond, completing their most classic lineup of the group. Paul passed away in 2019 at the age of 73. The 1978 album Obsession, along with its accompanying live album Strangers in the Night, which came out a year later in 1979, the band was shown to be at its zenith. Michael Schenker would leave the group in 1978, and Pete Way would leave 4 years later in 1982. Originally to form Fast Way with Motorhead's Fast Eddie Clarke, using the Fast from Fast Eddie Clarke and Pete Way's last name to create the Fast Way. However, due to label restrictions and legal issues, Pete Way left the band before they recorded their debut album. He then joined on playing bass with Ozzy Osbourne for the Speak of the Devil tour in 1983, before forming his own band Waysted along with Finn Muir on vocals, Ronnie Cafield on guitar, former UFO keyboardist and guitarist Paul Raymond, and former Def Leppard drummer Frank Noon. They released their debut album Vices in 1983, and the band has gone through many lineup changes over the years, with future members including Danny Vaughan on vocals, who would go on to front Taiketo, Andy Parker on drums from UFO, Paul Chapman on guitar from UFO, Phil Taylor on drums from Motorhead, and Jerry Shirley on drums from Humble Pie and Fastway. In all, the band would release 5 studio albums during its many formations. Pete Way would rejoin UFO briefly from 1988 to 1989 before finally settling back into UFO for 17 years between 1991 and 2008. In 1995, the classic lineup, including Michael Schenker, reunited and released the album Walk on Water. Over the years, Pete Way has dealt with a number of medical issues that have sometimes prevented him from touring and recording with UFO. And unfortunately, due to drug possession charges in the US, he had a hard time and was frequently unable to get a visa to tour with the band. In 2006, UFO released the album Monkey Puzzle, which would prove to be the last with Pete Way. In 2007, he formed a new group called Damage Control, and this group featured Robin George on guitar, Spike on vocals from the Choir Boys, and Chris Slade on drums from AC/DC, a sort of mini super group. The debut album that I just showed you came out in 2007. In 2017, he had his biography published called A Fast Ride Out of Here, which is a really good read, and I highly recommend checking it out. Pete Way and Phil Mogg also did 2 albums together under the name Mogg Way. This album here, their debut, and their follow-up album. These were released between 1997 and 1999. He also released a solo album called Amphetamine in 2000, and he worked with Michael Schenker on an album called The Plot in 2003. And just prior to his death, he was working on a second solo album with famed GNR producer Mike Clink, currently at this point unreleased, but hopefully it will see the light of day soon. 2 months ago, Pete Way sustained life-threatening injuries after an accident, and while he fought hard, he finally succumbed to those injuries on August 14th of 2020. Once asked in an interview what he wanted to be remembered for, he said he didn't know, but that he loved to play rock music and that he was glad that he played with so many good people. Pete, your immense catalog that you created with many other talented musicians will continue to be appreciated. You left your mark on all those good people and us music fans. Your music and legacy will not be forgotten and will live on in all of our hearts and minds. My thoughts and prayers go out to his family at this time. Rest in peace, Pete Way. Thank you. Everyone have a good day.